OK， 今天非常谢谢大家在台风天过后，然后赶来文心艺所参加这一场 𝗲𝗏 和 𝗔𝗍𝗶 的就是对谈。然后我相信这2天的台风假，应该大家的行程都被打乱，然后也很开心，就是今天还是有如期的举行这一场 talk。那我们曾经在2022年举办了 𝗲𝗏 的录像装置 AS YOU GO， 那一场展览我们学习到非常的多，然后我们也把后面的展场空间从白盒子变成了黑盒子。那在这场经验里面，我们也很谢谢 Henry 可以给了我们非常多学习的经验。那we are honored to invite 𝗲𝗏 to 文心to have a conversation with our founder Jenny, and we showed Henry's brilliant video installation As You Go into 2022. And it is a very important exhibition for us, and we learn a lot from you. So thank you so much for coming to Wenxin in person and share your opinion to us. So please welcome Henry and Jenny with a big applause.
谢谢大家今天来。我知道这2天其实我自己也很紧张，今天这个 talk 到底会不会如期举行？因为台湾已经放了2天的台风假，那很开心大家今天愿意拨空来。我相信2天的台风假，大家有很多的工作都 delay 了，然后今年还能来，我在这边谢谢大家。我也很谢谢 Henry 已经特地这次从日本绕过来台湾，跟我有一个 talk 在台北，让大家更了解他的作品，也更了解他的想法。You know, thank you for everyone to coming today after 2 days off of typhoon. Thank you for Henry come all the way from Japan to here, stop by, have talk with me, to experience his thought and his thinking about the work, and let's enjoy I hope everybody enjoyed the talk. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for organizing this conversation and inviting me here, and as well as for exhibiting As You Go. Unfortunately, I couldn't come back then, so it's my first time here, but very happy to be here now and to start this conversation.
Thank you. And you do a lot of all different kinds of work. You do paintings, videos, installations, paintings. Let's talk about what you're doing lately, the fresco. What made you to start to do the fresco? And it's been two years, more than 2 years right now, right?
About 2 years.
About 2 years. Can you talk a little bit about the fresco that you're doing right now?
Well, the fresco actually is it's like you said, it's a series of works, which is the most recent series of work, which I started 2 years ago, but also it's re-engaging with the medium, which is the medium from the Quattrocento, which is like a very ancient medium that you paint on a wet plaster. This is also why it's called al fresco. Which makes a big difference between fresco painting and wall paintings. It's different animal, different engagement with the surface. And I was introduced to fresco painting when I was studying in the Academy of Fine Arts in Albania, before I went to continue my studies in Paris. So even before I introduced myself to time-based media and video. But fresco painting for me back then was exactly the bridge that allowed me to go from painting, which was my education for 8 years, to time-based media. And there is something about fresco which is extremely time-based in so many levels. It's time-based because of the way how you compose with time. How, for example, when you paint al fresco, every day you paint what is called a giornata, which comes from the Italian, like what you can paint within a day. And what you paint within a day, it needs to be very strategically chosen. So the whole painting, depending on its size, can be made with as many giornatas as it needs to be to paint the whole surface of it. But it's also very time-based within the day, because when you paint a fresco, you do not go straight for the color that you want to be seen at the end. You have to bring the color layer by layer, which is what in Italian is called the velature. And layer by layer, you make it be darker and darker until it reaches the level it needs to reach. And then you have to let it dry. So as it dries, the colors will become lighter. So you always have to go darker. So you always have to project something that will look like that only a week or 2 weeks later. So, which also starts these questions of continuity, because when you are trying to make an image with different giornatas and you want to have a continuous image, you always have to project and anticipate how all these giornatas will dry, and at some point, when it's all finished, it will look like one image. So this aspect, for me, it was very important back then, and I think it was one of the things that intuitively led me to the time-based. Back then, when I started frescoes, I did not think of it in the way I'm explaining it now. Now I look back at it and I know what interests me. Back then, it was very intuitive, but one thing that interests me a lot, it was that it corresponded in a time when it was the end of the communist regime in Albania. So all of a sudden you go from a very closed society under the dictatorship, where very many things were forbidden. For example, in terms of art history, just to give you an idea, everything starting from Impressionism onwards were forbidden. So officially, as a young artist, you had no access to those images. Now, some people were luckier than others, and I belong to this luckier people that actually I could see things beforehand. But you always see what comes under the sleeve, you know, like in a forbidden way under the table. So things do not come to you in a chronological order. They come to you as they come. So maybe you see a book of Bruce Nauman before you see a book of Paul Klee. So it's not in the order of art history, but it produces an interesting component of rupture, of messing up with linearity and chronology. But to go back to fresco, is that one of the things that I liked most back then about fresco, which is how it helped me go out of painting, was that were two aspects. One is that during the dictatorship, because so many things were not allowed in terms of you could not just choose a subject, or abstract art was forbidden, etc. The only area of certain freedom that was allowed was in the gesture, the artistic gesture, for example, the brush stroke or the thickness of the paint. You should not abuse it, because you should still be within the norm. But still, there was a little bit of freedom in that to identify or to differentiate between different artists. And I hated that pseudo-freedom, because it was an allowance of freedom. So there's a contradiction, because freedom should not be allowed. Otherwise, it's not freedom in that sense. So fresco was a way for me to do away with gesture, with the painter's gesture. For a very simple reason, is that when you paint fresco, you're painting on a fresh surface. So you cannot do your Paganini. You cannot be like, because you are hurting the surface. So you really have to go with it very calmly, and also it pushes you to anticipate, like I said earlier. So these were the aspects that, and it slows you down in a moment that politically and culturally, everything started accelerating in Albania, because all of a sudden everything was possible. So from 1 month to the other, like the system shut, the regime fall, the schools shut down, and they opened a semester later. And then all of a sudden, my family of friends, like all the other artists, all of a sudden one became a surrealist, the other one became an expressionist, because people were drawn to do the things that they were forbidden for so long. But that too, I had a problem with it, because it's not freedom, because it's not coming from your own metabolism. It's like what brings in you the surreal the surrealist in it, or what brings in you the abstract expressionist, other than the fact that now it's allowed. So that's my strong relation to fresco.
So talking about the time, the factor of time in Vail, I remember that I watched your early film while you were still in college, over grad school, I think. The film that's about your mom, and that's in Vail. That's the factor of the time too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is like already when it comes to after the fresco. This is also the moment when I left Albania and went to Paris to continue studies for video and photography in the ENSAD, or Art Deco, the nickname of the school. And it's on my second year there that I did this film called Intervista with my mother, like being the key player in this film, being the I wouldn't say the subject, because the subject is not my mother, but it's in the interval. It changes, political, social changes. I don't know if it's a work that maybe I could show an excerpt from it.
Po nuk mundet, s'është absurde. Jo, nuk është e vërtet. Se s'është në asgjë, do të thënë është folë se s'është në asnjë gjë, s'ka asnjë mendim, nuk jam njëri që s'artikuloj dot mendim.
Mami, unë po të them që e kam bërë të shkolla shumë me mesve, janë të vetmit që mund ta zbërthejnë, dhe unë tani do të lexoj ty titrat dhe ti shih lëvizjen e gojës tënde.
E kupton, nuk po flas për planin politik, se s'ka asnjë gjë, s'ka logjik.
Mama, shiko. Ti shih buzët, përse për këtë takimin, ky takim ishte shpejt. Ajo ishte shumë e qartë për arsye se sipas parimeve të kësaj lufte, fascisme realizohet,
So this is I left a bit this excerpt of the film to introduce itself instead of me giving some context to it. It's after I'd moved to Paris to study there. Me and my sister having left at the same time, my parents moved to a smaller unit, to a smaller flat, and both me and my sister, we had eventually to go back and clean a little bit and choose what we wanted to keep and what they could throw. And they'd already prepared what they thought was mine and what they thought was my sister's. So among my things, I found this reel of 16mm film, which I'd never seen before. As I was studying in Paris, I took it with me and I could open it in a moviola. Moviola, it's the 16mm film editing tables. And this is where I discovered this film, where I could recognize my mother in a younger age, answering to being in a congress of the communist youth, where she was one of the leaders, and with the dictator, but as well as giving an interview, which is what you just saw. Unfortunately, the film did not have sound, because back then, technologically speaking, it was a different recording for the image and a different recording for the sound. So Intervista becomes like my journey back to Albania to find the words that were missing in the film, which I couldn't. So at the end, as a last resort, I went to the school for the deaf and mute children. That was the official name of the school back then. And as you could see, the lady, which is an old student of the school, she helped me by reading the lips, because they're so trained at it. So there is an archaeological aspect to that film, because it's about recovering something which was lost at the first sight. Now, that recovery was also turned to be a discovery for me, not so much a discovery about the content in terms of political content, because back then there was no sense of intimacy. Everything was so clear what you could say, what you could not say. So everybody was saying the same thing. Everybody was asked the same questions. Everybody came back exactly with the same answer, and you were not to drift out of the highway of political established meanings. But what was interesting is what she writes. My mother is very upset with, is that it sounds like she's not articulated. It sounds like she's not speaking well for somebody who is a very articulated person, who is capable of giving interviews, making public speeches. And that was a very interesting aspect for me, which I'd not necessarily thought of it before, but started making sense increasingly, is that during the communist regime, the control of the party, of the regime on the language as the main means of communication was so big that the language really had to fit a certain corridors of meaning, which also impacted the way how people spoke the language, so impacted the syntax when people were getting together in under public view, like when they were giving an interview or when they were giving a public speech. And you could not tell so, but when you listen to a speech 30 years later, this is when you realize that the language had become such a, in French you call it langue de bois. Langue de bois is like a wooden tongue, had been so stiffened by the regime that all of a sudden it sounds like somebody who spoke back then is way less articulated than they would be nowadays when they spoke. So this is something that made me aware of two things. The opacity of language and how much control is invested not in content but in syntax, because when you control the syntax you control the content. And I think this is something that has stayed with me in my work, not in such an explicit way as in Intervista, but my interest for syntax, for what is the architecture of meaning, not what is content, not what you're saying, not what you are giving to see, but how what is the economy behind an image or the economy behind a piece of music and what it tells by other means than the communication. This is something that remained very important in my body of work since then. But also the aspect of the interval, like you said, because when I think of my work from now, I think interval is a very important aspect of it, because interval means time, but also means architectural time, means the gap in between two moments, or the place in between, the space in between two places. So this is something which was the first work where the interval was so important.
So does Ravel, right?
So it's Ravel, a very good point, because Ravel, I can show an excerpt. It's if in Intervista the interval is 20 years, meaning it's 20 years between the footage of my mother when she was younger, or 20-something years, and when I did the film with her. Actually, now the interval between me, that I was watching now, between me having done the film and me myself here today, is becoming bigger. When I see the interval in my hair and so on. But that is the widest interval in my work.
I think when you shoot a video and the actual video that shows that you find it 30 years.
Yeah, it's something like that. And then in Ravel, which I can say a few words just to introduce it and show also an excerpt. Ravel, it's the shortest possible of intervals. And the shortest possible intervals, you become much more aware of them in music rather than in spoken language. And Ravel, it's a work, a video installation where I film two pianists. One only sees their hands, each of them playing the left-hand concerto of Ravel, which was commissioned to him by 𝗶𝗏 𝗏, having lost a heir to a very rich family, Austro-Hungarian, during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, First World War. He lost his right arm, but did not want to give up on playing piano. And because he was kind of a very rich family and very connected with the musical world, he commissioned about 40 piano concertos for his left hand alone and orchestra. So in my proposal of this left hand concerto, one sees two pianists, Louis Lorty and Jean-Florent Pavouzet, each of them accompanied by an orchestra. But the way they are playing the same concerto at the same time, yeah, they are not necessarily playing it in sync. And the way they go in and out of sync, this is very much the work, the way of how the intervals that can be as long as a couple of seconds, and then they can be as short as a split second or nothing. And the first time that I showed it, or several times that I've been showing this work, it's been shown in a space which is a semi-anechoic room. And an anechoic room, by definition, is a room which it's very recognizable because usually it has this triangular shapes on the walls. And scientifically, it's a room where there is no sound reflection. So the moment that there is no sound reflection, there is no more a perception of space. The space is there, it's for real there, but you do not perceive it anymore. This is also one of the reasons why if somebody stays in an anechoic room for too long and there is no sound, you lose the sense of balance, because of part of our equilibrium is based on the ear as not only the hearing organ but also an organ for the balance. So by playing with these intervals between the two executions of the same concerto, playing the same notes of the same score, but not at the same time, this opens all these moments of interval. The shorter the interval, the smaller the space. The larger the interval, the bigger becomes the space. So if the interval between the two pianists playing the same moment, the same note, becomes a few seconds, then the perception of it is that we are hearing the sound in a cathedral, for example, or in a very big hall. While when the moment that they played completely at the same time, because there is no reflection in the perception of space really shrinks to almost nothing. So that was both my conceptual approach to it, my idea, my inspiration to work with this idea of the interval, which would also deal with another aspect, which was the lack of the interval between the left and the right hand, with the right hand no longer being there.
Can we show the video a little bit?
Yeah. So this is what I was explaining before. There are these two pianists who are playing exactly the same score from the same concerto, but it's just that they are not playing it in sync all the time. But the way how they go in and out of sync, this was scripted before. That was a preparation before in order to produce these moments of the perception of space growing or being reduced. Of course, this is much more obvious in terms of perception when the work is installed, because it's installed in a way that we won't get as much reverb, while here we get reverb. So it's more difficult to perceive what I mean by the reduction of space when the interval becomes shorter.
I think these two videos are taking quite different times, but when I see the investor, you know, I see the feeling of your mom, you know, like to look back, you know, 30 years ago, you know, what she said, you know, it's the same person, but different thoughts. But I don't think she regrets what she did. She have to do something like that. For the piano that the Ravel, because of the stereo today, we cannot really tell the difference. But I remember we put a show on MySpace. If you hear very carefully, you could feel the interval. Yeah, and it's quite beautiful and quite touching. And what you see and what you hear is, you could see the slightly interval between.
Actually, another aspect which was part of the same project when I showed it the first time, Ravel Unravel, it's the complementary piece or the little sister piece to Ravel. It's called Unravel, and I asked a music producer and DJ, 𝗝𝗲, based in Paris, to I put her a little bit in the impossible task to I gave both concertos, both recordings, as a DJ set, one LP on one side and the other one on the other side. and I asked her to flatten the differences, to make the interval disappear. I'll show you a short excerpt of this, and actually it was an impossible task because it was both very difficult for somebody to anticipate and to accelerate what is lagging behind. For example, the mission, the idea is simple. When a pianist is lagging behind, you accelerate his playing, and when one is going too fast, you slow down his playing. And of course, it takes two hands, which is in a way the left and the right hand come back in to deal with this issue of interval and out of sync of the two left hands. But also, I filmed her in the when I showed it for the first time. It was in the German pavilion in Venice, and the German pavilion, because it's so big, the hall, it has a very big echo. So in a way, it was a and she was extremely good at certain moments with being able to flatten the difference. But however, it was a lost cause because of the reverb in the German pavilion. So it was like the space taking back its revenge. And then you clearly see this strong connection between the interval of time producing the echoes and the reverb of the space being an echo itself.
I would like to talk about the video 1395 Days. I believe that's the first video that I saw that, from you. It's 2017 in Venice, Pino's museum. It's quite touching for me because the situation in Taiwan is not that stable, and I saw the lady that walking by the street and the sniper will shot them every time people crossing the street or crossing the city. And I believe that's the longest video that you made. And it's quite beautiful. And then with the whistle and with the composer, the orchestra behind the background music. Can you talk about a little bit about the video?
Yes, 1395 Days Without Red. It's the title also contains already the duration of the longest siege in in modern times, which was the siege of the city of Sarajevo, which lasted more than 4 years. And just before I was speaking of the relation between how protocols of time can produce a perception of space, you know, like how, because of the echo, how you can work with music, which is a form of composing with time, not only with sounds. Music is not only composing the sounds, but also composing them along the passing of time. When it comes to the film 1395 Days Without Dread, it's a film that where one sees a woman crossing the city of Sarajevo, reliving what it was to cross the city during the siege. The city of Sarajevo, with the exception of the older part of the town, it's a city built in the socialist, in the modern times. So there is a certain modern city grid which evolves in the valley in the midst of hills and mountains along a river. So there is only one main street which connects all the parts of the city. And it's interrupted. I mean, there's other street crossings perpendicular to it, and there are around 12 or 13 crossings that during the siege were exactly the most dangerous places to be because of the open visibility of the snipers on those crossings. But that was the only venue that one could take in order to go from one part to another part of the city. There are no other options. There are no other alternatives. So in a way, and in this film, one sees the actress 𝗔𝗿 𝗶 crossing the city, reliving these moments of how it was to cross the city of Sarajevo during the siege. And she is humming a piece of music. Maybe, well, upon seeing the whole film, one thinks or figures out that maybe she's going to an orchestra rehearsal, to the rehearsal of the Sarajevo Philharmonic Orchestra, which, fact-based, it never stopped rehearsing and making concertos during the siege. And like every other sector in the life of the city, they also paid with their life. I think, if I remember it right, it was 7 musicians, they lost their lives during the siege in the city. So the film brings together the architecture of the city, the urban grid of the city, and the piece of music that she is rehearsing in her head. The piece of music is Pathétique of Tchaikovsky. And the way how in the film, I will show you 2 intersections, 2 crossings only. Like the film, like I said, is made of roughly 13 crosses and builds up with every crossing. There is a strong relation between the architecture, when you arrive to a crossing, the danger that it implies, the breath. She is rehearsing and humming her piece in her head. And every time she has, like everybody else, she has to cross these dangerous points. She gives it all. And once she's safely on the other side, she has to catch her breath. And breath is a time measure. So the more her breath accelerates, the more the music that she is rehearsing accelerates. And the more she catches it and she slows down, or especially in the parts that are more protected from the snipers, there she comes closer to the tempo and pace intended by Tchaikovsky, by the composer. So the idea of this film is considering the city like an empty score with all the musical bars, the staves, but without the notes, and the bars is the breath. So it's her acceleration or her slowing down her breath. This is what writes the music on the as she crosses the city. So it's like bringing together 2 partitions: the architectural partition, the urban partition, and the music composition in one. And they come in one through the experience of crossing the city during this geopolitical heightened situation, highly dangerous, and the breath of a human being that had to cross it every day. I'll show also another later crossing.
This section again. And one more time.
So in a way, how the film evolves is the first movement of the pathetic. So her crossing in the city corresponds to the first movement of the composition of the symphony, and not only, like I explained earlier, her humming impacts the tempo of how the music is performed, but in this parallel editing between her and the orchestra, it impacts also the playing of the orchestra, or vice versa. If she's not able to cross a crossroad, like in the last excerpt, then the orchestra will repeat that moment that she has in her head until she's able to move on, until she's able to cross. So there was a very strong connection between, like I said, between what is happening in her crossing to the city and the crossing of the orchestra with the successive parts of the composition.
Talking about crossing, this woman crossing the city, the video even only is a snail crossing from one place to another place. Is that something similar about the movies?
Yeah, well, there's clearly something in this aspect of what you might call the idea of the road movie, meaning a film that evolves on the road by crossing space. Of course, that's a different take on the road movies, because it's not like a 𝗝𝗲 and 𝗏 movie or the very known Hollywood movies of the genre. In the case of If and Only If, it's again about the idea of a journey that could be interrupted and could be slowed down or accelerated. A few words about the film. It's a very short road movie. It's the shortest possibly road movie because it's only 80 centimeters long in terms of the space. It's the crossing of the length of the viola bow by a garden snail, while a viola player is executing the elegy of Stravinsky, which itself is a very slow piece. I also choose a few words about the title, If and Only If, which is a little bit the language nomination about a conditional relation between two existences. It's like the formula to be conditionality, which is a little bit like the beginning of the algorithms, that is if and only if A is A, then the B, or if and only if there is a 0 first, then it's going to be a 1. So there is this very close connection between the condition of these two entities. In the case, and of course the reason why I chose this title for the film, is that while Gérard Cosset is performing the elegy, the presence of the snail along the bow has a huge impact in his playing. A multifaceted impact. First, one wouldn't say so, but when one plays the elegy is, with the exception of a few bars, the whole elegy is played on 2 strings at the same time, which means that the bow has to keep continuously this balance to be playing both strings of the viola at the same time. And the position where the whereabouts of a snail along the bow, while we might think that a snail is nothing in terms of weight, it does have a strong impact by its own weight on the bow of the musician. But also, the way I wanted also the journey of the snail to have also a direct impact on the music, not only by slowing or accelerating it, but have an impact in the composition of it. So, like I said, the elegy of Stravinsky is written for 2 voices, meaning continuously it plays on 2 strings. Then, and when I spoke with Gérard Cosset, the performer, I was discussing with him my desire that I would like that the journey of the snail would be as long as the music. So many things come together: the duration of the music and the duration of the journey of the snail. I had more or less an idea of how long it takes a snail in good health to cross the 80 centimeters. And also one knows more or less, depending on the interpretation of the music of the musician, however, that the elegy of Stravinsky in all the recordings is somewhere between 6 and 6.5 minutes, depending on some people play it a bit slower and some other people play certain parts a bit faster. But because I wanted these two, the journey of the music or the composition and the journey of the snail, to come together and end together, I discussed certain points along the musical path, along the composition, where depending on the snail, depending on how the snail was advancing or slowing down or stopping, Gérard had the possibility to continue only with one of the voices, meaning only with one of the strings. And as soon as he would see that the snail is accelerating again, it's on the good way, then he would go back and play all the notes that he did not play from the other string, from the other voice. So it's a process of bifurcation and coming together again. It's a process of deconstructing the elegy, but it's a deconstruction which happens only based on how the situation with the snail is evolving. So hence, at the end, the performance is really a duet between the snail and the musician, because of the impact of the influence of the snail on his playing, also by his own words, was very very influential.
Talking about road movies, 1395 Days Without Red, If and Only If, and the recent work, Time No Longer. It's a road, for me, it's kind of road movie too. Can you talk about the newest video that you made?
The Time No Longer is, I'll show an excerpt. It's a turntable that is playing a piece of music in zero gravity. It's a turntable inside the International Space Station that, as it's floating in weightlessness, it's playing the Quartet for the End of Times of 𝗵𝗵. And specifically the movement which is called the Abyss of the Birds, which was originally composed by 𝗵𝗵 for clarinet, as a solo clarinet. Then, just to give some background, my idea of playing I reworked or rearranged in collaboration with Olivier Guanard and André Vida, my sound designer, collaborator, as well as a composer and saxophone player. I rearranged the Abyss of the Bird for 2 instruments, for clarinet and saxophone. The saxophone is like an ode to Ronald McNair. Ronald McNair was an American Afro-American astronaut, but as well as an incredible mathematician, as well as a very good saxophone player, who was supposed to do the first recording with a professional instrument in space. And unfortunately, the day that the recording would happen is the day of the tragedy of the Challenger. Like he was part of the crew of the shuttle that took off, but shortly after taking off, it exploded in the air. So I thought of bringing together these two situations. Again, it's like a big conditional idea, the situation of a composition which was never played because of the accident, as an intention of something that never happened. And on the other hand, a piece of music, which is the Quartet for the End of Times of 𝗵𝗵, which is arguably the most famous piece of music written in a situation of captivity. 𝗵𝗵, when he composed his piece, he was a prisoner of war in a German stalag, being a French soldier during the Second World War Blitz, and he composed this while he was in captivity, and he composed it for 4 instruments. But he did not choose the instruments. He composed it for 4 human beings, players that he knew of who were in the camp. And so he composed it for the 4 instruments they could play. So in the film, which is a computer-generated imagery film, meaning it's not a video, it's a CGI, it's a simulation, but it's a simulation which is completely based on real mathematical models of how a body, the behavior of a body in zero gravity, depending on the initial spin and its weight and where the center of its weight is. So these are very mathematical, known and well-studied models, which allow also for a very realistic approach to what really would happen or what really happens in zero gravity. And what it does do is that, as you'll see in the excerpt, the turntable, the stylus is playing, but it continuously loses touch because of the rotations and the revolution. It loses touch with the music because it loses touch with the vinyl, and until it lands back on it during its orbiting. But of course, it will never go back to where it plays, to the last note it played, and sometimes it goes back somewhere earlier, and sometimes it goes back somewhere much later. So it produces a non-linearity and a rupture into the composed chronology of music by 𝗵𝗵. So in the film is 30 minutes long, but it covers an interval of time of 45 minutes from sunrise to sunset, because when up there in the International Space Station, within a window of a day, so within a window of 24 hours, an astronaut would see 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets, because there's a speed with which the International Space Station has to travel around the Earth, not to fall into the gravitational pull of the Earth. So in order to keep that safe distance, it has to go much faster to escape from the pull, which also produces this advent of 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets. So the film, if we would see the entire film, it would correspond from one sunrise to the consecutive sunset.
Last question I'm going to ask. From all the video that you made, I find out that music is quite important for you. Can you talk about the relationship between the architecture and the movie? And the music, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is we have been crossing along this subject from the beginning, even if implicitly, because the relation between, for me, music, it's like allows me to organize space. Of course, music is there to also organize time, organize the passing of time, but also the way how I approach it, it also allows me to organize space. It allows me also to organize an exhibition, or to organize the architecture of an exhibition. But then it could go into more explicit examples of what I was speaking of, 1395 days of how the urban grid becomes the stave on which Tchaikovsky's Pathetique is rewritten on, depending on the pace of the breath, of the breathing. But I'll probably, like as a last excerpt, because I have it there, I'll show an excerpt from another work which is called Answer Me, which I shot in Berlin in what is called Teufelsberg, which is a building which was built at the height of the Cold War by NSA, the national, meaning the mother institution above CIA, which was of course at the height of the Cold War. They invested in Berlin in this station for eavesdropping, to hear the communications between the Soviet Union and its allies. The dome on which the rudder was hidden in this building it's a structure by a geodesic structure, which is a signature structure by Buckminster Fuller, as you recognize in the beginning of the film, and because of its shape, it has an incredible echo. So when I went to visit this space, when I was introduced to this space by a fellow friend of mine, an artist, to visit it had a very long echo. So I thought, instead of thinking of how to produce a narrative that tells the story of this building, why not just let the building influence any given narrative? So once again, I thought about this small dialogue that was written by Antonioni, but that he never shot it into a movie. There is beautiful publication of all his small scripts that he never realized. And I remember the dialogue between a couple where Antonioni, in his own words, he writes down that actually a couple were splitting. So it's the last words they're saying to each other. And then he says, I'm not so interested to film what they're saying to each other, but I'm interested in the awkward silence between the words, between what they say to each other, and the awkwardness and the difficulty of this moment. So I thought, oh, it would be interesting to stage this dialogue, but in a situation of awkward loudness because of the reverb in this. And I also knew, musically, mathematically, I knew that when a building has a very big resonance, it means that there is one frequency which is called the frequency response of a given space, meaning there is one frequency that the space responds the most if you play that frequency. So I contacted, together with this friend, I contacted a friend of ours who is a drum player, and I told him that I'd like to rewrite this conversation of Antonioni, but where between a woman and a man, where I would like him, the drummer, to be the man, and the drumming would be his response to her words. But the only direction that I gave him was that whatever the beat, whatever he was going to play, it had to cross continuously in the frequency of the space. It's to cross continuously this frequency to which the space responds the most. I'll show the excerpt and you. Actually, it's his playing, his drumming that is playing also the other drum, because the other drum is responding to the traveling of the main frequency of his playing that is making it play as if it was like a ghost player playing it, and this is literally using the to come back to the word syntax, is using the morphology or the syntax of the space of the building in order to make it speak, or in order to have it have an influence on what is happening in the narrative of that small story of a split between within this couple. So that is sorry. So this is really like literally the architecture and the space having an impact on the sound. So it's, but also the other way around, it's how the drum is playing the space, but also how the place is playing the other drum, the drum that plays by itself.
Thank you. I think we talk about a lot of his video, and because of time, maybe we can let the audience ask 1 or 2 questions. Anyone? Rudy.
You just mentioned German pavilion, and we know that is supposed to be French pavilion. And so whose idea to like exchange this pavilion?
Well, actually, it was a political idea. It was an idea that has been going and coming in cycles. Apparently, I learned at the time when it was proposed between France and Germany, and every time it was in relation to the anniversary of the Élysée Treaty, which was one of the landmarks of these two major European nations towards building a peaceful cohabitation together, which would lead also to the European Union later on. So every time it was seen as a symbolic, the swapping of pavilion as a symbolic gesture of swapping perspectives. Also, the two pavilions are literally facing each other, of putting yourself in the space of the other. Ideas that maybe in 2013, when it happened, everything was cohabitation was something which is taken for granted. So it's not. Hence, you wouldn't know exactly why it happened. Nowadays, we can no longer take for granted such situations. So their importance grows with time. So it was an idea that did not come from the artists or the curators. It was an idea which was put on the table by the politicians of both countries. It had been proposed before on another anniversary, 10 years earlier, or whenever it was introduced, it was not accepted either by an artist or by a curator, which means it was not an idea which was imposed on you. It was an idea that you had to take it or leave it, and there was absolutely zero imposition on it. I found it a very interesting idea, and times do tell us now how strong that idea is. Back then, it just disappeared in thin air because, like I said, it was a bit this golden era of no borders, no identity politics, no nationalism in their eyes. And so it was something that I immediately liked the idea. I also think that dealing with the German pavilion as architecture is more interesting. And especially dealing with the German pavilion while playing there Ravel is much more complementary and interesting than playing music of Ravel in the French pavilion, because then there would be a certain redundancy about it. So it was much better for the context, for the background of my work, and it was also an idea that was agreed or liked on the opposite side by the German artist and curator. So it happened.
用中文问吗？因为我自己住在山上哦，每天走路都会碰到蝸牛。然后他刚刚那个影片里面的蝸牛怎么会那么乖，从头到尾都没有缩进去？这是怎么做到的？
Well, it took a lot of organization to do this film, so it's not something that happened from one day to the other. So there was a big time between the moment I had the idea and the moment I could shoot the film. To shoot the film, it meant 5 days of shooting. It meant playing, having the privilege of also filming with one of the most famous viola players alive. Having the privilege to film a viola instrument, which is one of the oldest that is still playable. It's from 1600. I forgot the precise year, but it's known. So all this took time to come together, and before we got there, I also did tests. I learned about the snails, and I also worked with a scientist from the University of Lille in north of France. So he was all the time there during the shooting of the film, and also because things are always more complicated than they seem, and when they don't seem complicated, then you really feel satisfied, because it means that you are sharing the best part of it and not the complication. I shot in January, and in January snails are in hibernation. So I contacted the scientist before, and because he was embedded in the university and they had a lab, he kept the snails not awake, meaning they could sleep whenever they need to sleep, but they did not need to go on hibernation because they were in a warm environment. So they were kept from November until when we did film and until the spring. So they did not need to go to before he introduced them back into their habitat. So all these is steps and processes and conversation and understanding, and even then you don't know until the last moment how a snail will behave from one day to another day. So there is a little bit of the unknown in it, of a challenge, of like you prepare everything, but you don't know how it's going to happen, and not knowing everything is very important for me. It's important. Probably it comes intuitively already. What happens to rupture, to history, like a nation that goes through big ruptures, and then the day after you have to reinvent yourself. People have to reinvent themselves in new professions the moment that the regime falls. So this is like a big answer about politics, but I think this moment of producing the conditions for the unexpected to happen, this is very important to me when I work with fiction. Because when it comes to fiction, the idea is that everything can happen because it's not documentary, it's not something which is outside of your control. So for me, it's very important to always produce a challenge that does not allow me to completely control the situation. So I set the conditions for it to start, but I cannot control its outcome. And I think this is part of the DNA of my work. And it's the same thing when I mentioned briefly about Time No Longer, for example, earlier, that CGI, as long as you have the money and the budget, you can do it to whatever you feel like. But to me, it was very important to not have control on the behavior of the turntable and the stylus. So the mathematical models allowed to take away that control from me. So I had to accept and embrace the fact that the stylus would not necessarily continue to play, even if I liked a lot that moment in music to continue uninterrupted, it would still interrupt it. So weightlessness became the unknown factor, in the same way as the behavior of the snail was the unknown factor. Then more serious things. What happens in a crossing in a city under siege? Well, that is a much bigger, much more dramatic, much more human, infused with history and geopolitical conditions out of our hands, but still is not knowing the moment after. So this was also for the snail. There was I knew a lot of things about it, but until the moment we finished shooting, I could not know for sure that it was going to happen as I had wished for.
Last question. Yeah.
You look at me.
So the third one, so the fourth one. So actually, thank you, Henri, for coming for such kind of a 20 years rich talk. And I think I saw your work first time in Paris in 2002 or 3 in a church called Haute Chanelou. And that was a very kind of my first impression about your work. So for the talk today, maybe the only question about your work is the fresco, because your work is always situated in this kind of economic, political background situation, and how you situate yourself this fresco work in this kind of a series. Because when I saw the work is kind of impression that you took the snapshot from the airplane, and the painting is kind of a negative theme. So I'm wondering whether how you perceive that. Could you elaborate?
Well, the fresco, I was trying to see if I could find an image of them, but that sound like this is not. Maybe I can. Just give me only 1 second, so maybe I can, for the ones who haven't seen the frescoes, maybe I can send something in the background. Yeah, I'll just let it run. So there are two. Okay, so there are two series in this body of frescoes. It's a series which you're seeing now, which is Surface to Air, which is based on images I take when I fly. For example, I always take a window seat, so I can take images of the clouds from above, and sometimes with certain windows of visibility, you can recognize the earth under. And in these frescoes, there are incrustations of marbles that I select, that I choose, and then I cut in a certain way, which somehow they, in my imagination, they correspond to lost giornatas, meaning in the old frescoes, for example, they're always, very often they are damaged over time by human-related events or climate events, and there are always the parts which are missing. What I was interested, I wanted to invert the relation between the painted surface and the missing part, because the missing part in a fresco is always the part which is either you can see that image was missing, or there is a technique of restoring where people paint it to secure a continuity of the image, but always paint it less well, not to pretend that it was never damaged. So that part is always the newest part, the most recent part, and there is always less resolution. Whereas here, I was interested in reversing the situation, because a stone is always older than the painted surface that I'm painting, and always has more resolution, because it's a resolution of hundreds or thousands or millions of years being compressed within that surface. So this is so in that series I was interested in this bringing together this triple time factor, which is a depiction of the shortest moment in time, which is a moment when a cloud is about to change its shape from a moment to the moment after. This very long weakness of time, which is the rock, and the time it takes for it to be formated and to exist. And also the time as represented by fresco. I mentioned this in the beginning of the conversation, how much fresco is a time-based medium in the sense that it composes the image by giornata. So it's a coming together of these three elements. And then there is also another series, I do not have images here of it, which is the series with the inverted images. In art history, but particularly in the moment of the junction between art history and the medium of fresco, there are the fresco painters or the masters that I am the most fond of. So I started this series with Piero della Francesca. There has been some other frescoes based on Fra Angelico, and of course there are other, like Masaccio is another fresco painter that I admire. There are also other ones like Giotto, one of the greatest, but I admire less when it comes to the fresco paintings of his. But to me, these are like references of the medium in the history of time and art history. But I invert them, so before I paint them, I do not make copies of it, but I invert the image as if it was the color negative of a photograph that photographed the fresco. So I paint it in negative. I'm sorry that I don't have any image here to show. And why I was interested to do that is that the color negative is a protocol, is a procedure which belongs to modernity. It's absolutely a procedure, a negative procedure, which is not intuitional at all. We all recognize the negative of shape, the idea of the coins, the fact of walking on the beach with our bare feet and seeing the negative of our steps. While color negative is, unless you understand the theory of color and you've been taught about it, it's not something that you'd recognize. So it's something which only the development of technology relation to image making produced. Otherwise, it would never existed. And at the same time, while the fresco technique has been used so much in the 1400, like at the period of the Quattrocento, it's no longer used so much, but it's still there. The color negative is about to become obsolete. Like, for example, younger generations, much younger than me, I wouldn't be surprised if many would not know about the color negative, because our relation to the image is through the positive now. Like all the iPhone images are directly positive. So the idea of the color negative, although it's something which is so related to the modernity, it's already obsolete. It's already archaeological. It's already something of the past. And by saying that, I'm not saying it, I'm saying it as a fact. I'm not saying it either as a regret or neither as a wish. I feel connected to it because I'm part of that generation that accompanied this moment of the color negative and then going to the digital. But it's a fact that it's by now it's more obsolete than the fresco itself as a medium and technique.
Thank you, Henry, for coming to Taipei to have a talk in my space. And thank you, everyone. After 2 days of typhoon, we still make your effort here to support me. And thank you, everyone. And I hope I see you soon again in Taipei, maybe.
Yeah, I look forward. The typhoon is a very good excuse to say, well, I have to come again. But no, it's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for.
谢谢，我们后面有准备饮料跟点心。